This is a story of all of the strange things I encountered while near the Bayside Marketplace in Miami. Something that would later be referred to online as the Miami Mall alien incident. Now, let me be clear. I never was inside the mall directly myself, and I cannot personally attest to seeing 10-foot tall shadow aliens with my own eyes, but I definitely experienced some strange things on that night. If you are unfamiliar, this happened on the 1st of January 2024. There were news articles and reports online about people seeing these shadow aliens in a mall in Miami, and the police response was absolutely massive. It was massive news online for around 24 hours, before information and talk online seemed to vanish off the face of the earth, and articles suddenly claiming a massive police response was sent out to deal with teenagers setting off fireworks. Okay, so for a context, I am German, and at the time of the incident, I was on vacation in the United States with my fiancée. We were spending the evening near Maurice Ferry Park, only a short walking distance away from the Bayside Marketplace. Everything initially seemed completely normal. The waterfront was crowded with tourists. People were taking pictures of the skyline. Families were enjoying the evening, and others were simply walking through the park. It was exactly what you would expect from a busy night in downtown Miami. Then, within what felt like only a few minutes, the atmosphere changed entirely. At first, it was subtle. People began moving away from the direction of the Bayside Marketplace faster than before. Some of them were looking over their shoulders. Other people appeared visibly distressed. Then, the pace increased. Soon, large numbers of people were running away. At first, I assumed there had been a fight, an accident, or perhaps some kind of security incident. However, the level of panic that I witnessed seemed far beyond what I would normally associate with just a simple disturbance. What disturbed me the most that evening was not the police response. It was the people. As a paramedic in Germany, I have dealt with panic attacks, severe intoxications, psychotic episodes, traumatic injuries, and people experiencing the worst moments of their lives. Because of that, unusual behavior rarely surprises me. The people coming from the direction of the Bayside Marketplace were different. Many people appeared genuinely terrified, not excited and not hysterical in the way that you would expect after a fight or a public disturbance, but deeply unsettled, like something shook them to the core, something they could not explain, something they didn't know how to normally react to. What immediately caught my attention was that several of them seemed unable to explain what had happened, even though they were desperately trying to. I spoke to multiple people. Most of them talked rapidly, often gesturing behind them or repeatedly looking back toward the marketplace. Their speech was fluent, but incredibly difficult to follow. They would start one sentence, then suddenly switch to something completely unrelated, and then they would return back to their original point without ever really explaining anything. I have to mention, there was a little more weird phenomena once the people started pouring out and away from the mall. The sky seemed to get dark really quickly all of a sudden. These dark gray clouds seemed to roll in, but only in like the very local area. It never rained. These clouds just roll in faster than I realized, and they also dissipated not long after the people stopped coming out of the mall. I will also mention that before anyone even came out of the place, and I felt the atmosphere change, I could feel this weird feeling in the air. I kept walking around and feeling these like tiny shocks in the air, on my neck, on my arms, especially where the hairs on my arms are, just tiny little shocks occasionally. Not enough to be painful, but definitely enough that I noticed them. I saw this one like flash in the sky too, way before the clouds, way before the atmosphere changed. Back when everything still felt normal, I guess you could say. It was like way up in the sky. Just a momentary white flash, a blink and you'll miss it type of thing. Not enough to engulf the whole sky, but just a blanket bit of sky in the immediate area. Just boom and then gone. That was not all either. When that big stream of people started funneling away from the mall, and some of them were sprinting now, there seemed to be another wave that came after, but it was like delayed. It was like you had this big stream of people, then a pause, and then a second wave of people. One of the people running away from the mall was a man who looked decently old, actually. I would say he was either in his 50s or in his 60s. He looked in horrible shape, and like his knees could give way at any second. He just looked really, really frail. But he was sprinting, probably quicker than I myself could even run. He was not paying attention to his surroundings at all. He was just running, knocking into people on the way, and he even knocked over a trash can that was on the side of the street. I was in his path, and I shouted at him, and I was like, "Hey, dude," and I tried to move out of the way, but he was running so erratically, I couldn't tell where he would go, and he ended up knocking me to the floor, and he ended up falling on top of me. The dude's eyes just seemed so gigantic and wide. He barely even seemed like he was on the same planet. He started trying to talk to me, but every time he opened up his mouth, he could not stop dribbling and stuttering. It was gross, actually. He would be like, sorry, I need to," and then he would start coughing and sputtering up his lungs. He never once looked at me when saying all of this, by the way. His head was facing me, but it was like he could not look directly forward or make eye contact with me. He got up and ran away without even finishing his sentence, and I saw him knock into more people on the way. That was not the only weird shit that I saw from where I was. I saw a group of teenagers, maybe 2 or 3 of them. They were running away from the mall with their cell phones in their hands. One of them was shouting something about they blocked it. I don't really know what that means. I only got a quick glimpse, but it almost looked as if all of their phones were just cracked. The screens were black, and they did not look turned on at all. And then, later on, in that second big wave of people, the kids were in the first, by the way, I noticed a woman right at the back of the pack, just walking really slowly. She had this blank expression on her face, but she had a big stream of blood running from out of her nose, down onto her neck, and then staining the collar of the t-shirt that she was wearing. She was just walking casually, like nothing was wrong at all, like she had not noticed anything. I ran up to her and asked if she was okay, and if she needed any medical attention. I made sure to mention my profession so it didn't come off as weird or me harassing her. But she just stared at me, tilted her head, and then just kept walking forward, like she was looking right through me. She walked past me, and I tried to ask her again, thinking maybe she was in shock. I told her that I was concerned, and that it would be no problem for me at all to try and get her help. She turned and looked back at me for a second, but again, like she was looking right through me. She wiped some of the blood from her nose, took a look at it for half a second, and then just said, "I have work tomorrow." And I shit you not, the whole time that she spent walking away, she kept taking the blood and wiping it away from her nose, and then wiping it across her cheek, or even licking the blood off of her hand. I was so confused. More people walked out just like that woman, only without the blood. They just had blank expressions and were not running, unlike the other people right beside them. Anytime you would try to talk to them, they would either look at you like you were talking a foreign language, or they would just mutter some gibberish and then just keep walking on. What made it really unsettling was that this was not an isolated observation. I encountered several people, just like I said, who gave me the exact same impression. They could talk, they could produce language, but they couldn't communicate what they were saying. It was like their brain and their mouth actually had a disconnect of some kind, almost like their whole body had some kind of disconnect with some of the people that I saw. At the same time, many of them had noticeably dilated pupils, and they appeared highly agitated. They would snap, they would get annoyed very quickly or just blank me and walk off. My first thought was some form of intoxication, but that didn't really make sense at all. Not all of these people could have been drunk or high all on the same thing. And I mean, the behaviors were too different to be consistent with one thing. And they definitely did not behave like some people who had witnessed a fight or a robbery or some other kind of incident. If the official explanation is to be believed, I think the people would be a lot more panicked if they had fireworks shot at them, or if a group of teenagers were trying to harass them and fight them. I think they would be a lot more angry than they were visibly. Rather than being quick to anger, I think they would have been already pissed off. And also, surely some adult would have fought back, taught these kids a lesson. The overwhelming impression I was left with after the fact, after I had time to think about it all, was that these people had seen something that had frightened them badly enough to run. Yet for whatever reason, they seemed unable to properly explain what it was. As for the people walking, it must have just been shock, I guess. As someone who spent years assessing people in stressful and life-threatening situations, I can honestly say that their behavior was one of the most unusual things I witnessed that entire night. I remember I spotted a little girl all on her own, just walking with her teddy bear. I can't remember how old she was, maybe 4, 5 years old. She had no parents with her, and it being late at night, I was quite worried for her safety. I asked her where her parents were, and she just kind of turned her head to the side when she looked at me, kind of like a dog would when it is confused. And then she said, "I don't have parents, they're in the mall." Again, it just didn't make sense. Anyway, I did not have to call the police to help her because the police response came pretty soon after. So, then came the police response. And that was the moment I realized this situation was far larger than I had initially assumed. Police vehicles began arriving from multiple directions. At first it was just a few, and then it was many, many more. Within a very short period of time, the area appeared completely flooded with law enforcement. I have never witnessed such a large police presence in my entire life. Coming from Germany, where even major cities rarely deploy that many units at once, the scale of the response was difficult to comprehend. Every direction seemed illuminated by flashing blue and red lights. Sirens echoed between the buildings, there were that many of them, while officers rapidly moved into position around the area. The entire vicinity of Bayside Marketplace and the park and the surrounding streets appeared to be under immediate law enforcement control. What also caught my attention was that many of the people leaving the area were not simply allowed to continue on their way. Numerous individuals were stopped by officers, questioned, and in many cases, escorted toward patrol vehicles. Some people, the teenagers for example, tried to run away from the police and divert their angle. And I actually saw one of them tackle one of these teenagers to the ground. It was insane. I had never seen such a large-scale detainment by force. From my perspective, it appeared unusually organized and systematic. I wanted to understand what was going on, and I also wanted to figure out whether there were any casualties that required any medical assistance. So I approached one of the deputies. I identified myself as a German paramedic and asked if any medical support was needed while ambulances and such arrived. The response to me was immediate. I was instructed to leave the area. When I tried to ask what had happened, I was warned that if I remained there, I could be arrested for interfering in external affairs. What he said, that phrase, that immediately made me feel weird. I don't know. I'd never heard it before. It didn't seem like a common American law enforcement term. I know I'm from Germany, but you watch TV, you see police responses, you kind of learn these things even if you're not from there. A short time later, I was informed that remaining in the area at all could result in a trespassing charge. At that point, it became clear that nobody was interested in answering questions, so I left, which was weird because I was not detained like all of the other people. I was not questioned. Even while walking away, I remember repeatedly looking back toward the marketplace. The flashing lights in the sky, they continued to multiply. I kept seeing those momentary flashes of white in the sky as more and more time passed. At first, I only saw the one for a brief second, way before anything even occurred, but they seemed to be occurring now with less time in between, and also for longer. By the time I was forced to move away by the police, the bright flash in the sky was lasting for just over a second, and it was happening every few minutes now, with seemingly no way for it to be emitted by anything around. I could not tell what the source was. More and more vehicles arrived, more and more officers appeared, and despite the enormous response, I still had absolutely no idea what triggered such a dramatic reaction in the first place. Nobody around could tell me what was going on. Surely one of the passers-by, or even the police, could just tell me it was fireworks being set off. And more importantly, I never heard a bang coming from the mall. Surely I was close enough to where I would hear the bang of fireworks exploding. The next day, my fiancé and I boarded our return flight to Germany. What happened before we were able to even get on this flight back to Germany was probably, in many ways, stranger than the events in Miami. Before we could get through all of customs and were going through the TSA scans and etc., customs officers stopped every single passenger from our flight. I think they were all from our flight anyway. I saw most of the people that were stopped on my flight later on. Normally, customs personnel are present at airports, but this was different. Nobody was simply waved through. Instead, each and every passenger was separated and escorted away. We were brought to an interrogation area where officers were waiting to speak to us. I myself was actually escorted away into a private room in order to have a full-body search conducted. I asked multiple times for them to give me the reason for such a thing, and they kept on giving me trickles of information and avoiding the question entirely. At first, I was told it was just a safety precaution due to an incident that happened earlier that day. He would not tell me the incident that happened either, and I found no news report about an incident in an airport on that date. Then he changed his story and told me that something in my bag or on my person triggered a silent alarm and that they needed to check. I knew that this was impossible because I was traveling incredibly light. I didn't have anything on my person at all, and I did not even have anything metal or electronic aside from my cell phone, which was in my bag. After more pressure being put on him, he admitted to me that I matched a physical description of someone that they were on the lookout for. I was furious, to say the least, and tried to kick up a fuss, but if I'm honest, my fiancée just wanted to go home, and I knew that she would be angry if I made us miss our flight. So I agreed, even though they gave me veiled threats about how this would not end well for me, and how I should just consent, otherwise this would be escalated quickly. I'm pretty sure it's not in their job description to intimidate paying customers. It was not a full strip search or anything like that. I don't think that that would be legal on the spot without proof presented to me or other legal requirements, but I had to remove my jacket and other bulky layers, and they even pressured me to remove my jeans or at least loosen them, to which I refused. I don't know if it was coincidence, but they were pretty rough with me. They would grab me, and when they did, they would twist my arm slightly when searching me, or they would put a lot of pressure on me with their grip. And if I tried to protest, they just told me that things would go much quicker if I kept my mouth shut. At one point, when this man went to grab my arm to search my body, he pretty much open palm slapped my body before tightening his grip, and it wasn't a light one either. I of course filed a complaint and tried to escalate things once I was out of there, but of course, it never went any further. I was basically told that I was talking a load of nonsense and made it up, and that nothing was going to be progressed. The flight was not particularly full, as it was not a typical peak travel period, which made the situation even more noticeable. Our mobile phones were collected almost immediately after these searches were done. I'm not sure how many people were taken to a private room to be searched, or if it was just me. At some point, Documents were presented containing extensive personal information. The paperwork included details such as names, phone numbers, device information, and other identifying data. I remember being surprised by how specific the information was. According to another German tourist whom I had met at the hotel, photos and videos stored on his device had later disappeared. That when he immediately got his phone back, it was all fine, everything was still there. But when he later landed and got to his home, it had just vanished. I kept in touch with him, which is how I knew this. It's weird though, because I gave him my number, which he saved in his phone, and he told me later on that the number had also disappeared from his phone, and that he was lucky he had a good memory for numbers. So yeah, he said that photos and videos stored on his device had later disappeared, mostly just from his vacation. The same was true for footage that I had recorded during the incident. Videos, photographs, and even certain voice recordings that had been stored on messaging applications were no longer available afterwards. Several of us were asked whether we wished to speak with an attorney. The timing seemed strange. By that point, our devices had already been examined. We were eventually released and allowed to leave. No confidentiality agreements were signed. No explanations were provided beyond a brief few statements. The entire process felt abrupt, highly organized, and unlike anything I had ever experienced before. Since then, I have spoken about the incident only with close friends and family members. I have never publicly posted about it online. I am not claiming to know what happened that night. I can only describe what I personally witnessed. Take my story as you will. I was around 17 years old when this happened. I was in South Carolina, driving up from Charleston to Dorchester for a party with a friend of mine named Kyle. I was the driver and he was the passenger. Now, I had lived in South Carolina for 7 years and spent another 6 in Sevierville, Tennessee prior to that, and I was in love with the wilderness. Nothing creepy had ever happened in all that time, regardless of how rural or backwoods I had gotten. So, driving up there, the hour got late. We were on a stretch of lonely road with nothing but woods and swamp on either side of the road. There were no buildings, no houses, and there was no real civilization around for around 30 miles ahead or behind us either. Conversation was typical 17-year-old dude conversation. Dude, we're gonna get so wasted. I haven't seen these guys in forever. And so on and so forth. I have my eyes on the road. However, in order to make sure I do not slam into some random wildlife crossing by, with no lights in the woods at 1:30 in the morning, visibility was fairly shitty. As I am talking, I spot something around 500 feet up ahead on the road, walking along the side of the pavement towards our car. As my mind is on driving and conversation, my first thought on the figure was probably some hitchhiker, or maybe someone's car broke down. However, as soon as I heard how strange both of those possibilities sounded when I thought them, I started to watch the figure much more closely. It was 1:40 in the morning, right now, in the middle of the damn woods, with no civilization for dozens of miles in either direction. And the road is only one way. I haven't passed a car or seen another car in over an hour. The conversation slows down as the figure gets closer. I realize that something is not quite right because it is way too tall now that it's closer. I am 5'10" and my friend was 6'1", but this thing had to have been at least 8 foot tall, and the body proportions were all wrong. The arms dangled far below the hip, with human-esque hands, with way too long fingers. They stuck out so far. I could not make out claws, but who knows? It was dark, so I could not see everything. The head was bald. The skin was this pale gray-white, like a maggot. And this person had these mottled brown splotches, which may have been dirt, or it may have been natural coloration. The eyes were black and large, and reflected light in a predatory way when the truck's lamps shone on them. The legs were bent oddly at the knees, but they were quite long nonetheless. I could not make out the feet, but the hands were humanish, so I would presume that the feet were too. The worst part was the mouth. Imagine a human mouth where the lower jaw has been stretched and distended all the way down to the chest. The teeth were yellow and sharp. The mouth was red when it opened up, but it had no visible tongue lolling around. Our conversation just stopped dead. I flicked the high beams on, as it seemed to be quickening its pace as we approached. It was moving in a very jerky and halting manner, and when the high beams hit the thing, it shrieked in this weird two-toned way and made to move across the road, which was bad, because my reaction had been to slam on the accelerator in order to pass by the thing without it getting too close. We locked eyes as I approached, and I introduced that grey-skinned motherfucker to a Ford F-150 doing about 70. When we collided, everybody screamed. Me, Kyle, and Stretch Armstrong. And that thing made a pleasingly solid foom upon impact with the right corner of the hood and the bumper. The shrieking stopped abruptly and turned into a squalling moan, and the impact sent it hurtling into a tree on the roadside. We kept going. There was no blood and only minor damage to the truck. As we passed it, I told my friend to check behind us, and he said, "It's down. I can see its legs. It's not moving." I nodded once and stayed quiet for another 5 minutes. My friend, who was used to being a badass and playing high school football on the D-line, was visibly shaken. He was in his seat and he was hyperventilating. I drove the rest of the way in silence, got to the party, said hi so I could get through the door, locked myself in the bathroom, looked myself in the mirror, and probably cried for about 15 minutes. I have no clue what road that was on. I live in Miami now. I'm now 27 years old. I don't really care whether anyone believes me. I know what I saw, and I saw it way before this website ever even existed, or even knew what a skinwalker was. I was a huge nerd, very much into D&D and other crap, so part of my issue was trying to figure out what fucking monster I even saw. It didn't seem to match any description of anything I'd ever heard of. All I knew was it was not human, and we gave it a black eye in exchange for a dented hood and scratched up paint, so I knew it was solid and not some kind of a ghost or hallucination. Alright, so this happened to me quite a long time ago. I was around 16 years old when it happened. I'm in bed and my dream just starts up. I can smell the strange smell in my room. I decide to turn on the light to investigate. Of fucking course, in none of my dreams do lights work for some reason. I get freaked out and feel like I am being watched. I decide to head downstairs. My house just turns into a sewer. I'm talking stone stairs, and in the living room, only a large pit full of who knows what, with a railing going around it. I get freaked out and start trying to find the exit in this now converted house. I stumble down a posh-looking newly decorated corridor that's just off the living room. I look around the corner. I hear a scream and see a wall covered in blood from top to bottom, with intestines and ligaments on the floor nearby. I panic and open the door right next to me. There is just total blackness inside. I hear a sudden scuffling noise. The tallest, fastest being I have ever seen rushes up to me, comes right up to my face, and shakes its entire body manically. I wake up in a cold sweat afterwards, just glad to be alive. The image of the being haunted me ever since. It was about 7 feet tall, completely grey, with a blank face, and it somewhat resembles Slender Man in general shape when I think about it, only without the extra dozen back appendages. I have another one. I'm not sure what it's classified as though. I'm around the same age, 16 years old. I am in the middle of sleeping. I feel an urge to go to the bathroom. I enter the bathroom, and then all of a sudden, after nowhere, I feel really, really dizzy. Bear in mind, I'm awake at this point. I know I'm not in the middle of a dream. Everything feels too real. I lay down, and I fall while doing so, and bang my head on the floor. I guess I must have blacked out or something, and I wake up at that instant. Only, I'm not in the bathroom on the floor. I'm actually in my bed, which means it must have been a dream. But I checked the back of my head, and I found a bruise there where I banged it not 2 seconds ago. If it was a dream, how could that be possible?